Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Jason Ibsen, and this is the What Are We Doing Here podcast. Hey, you're probably wondering why I named it the What Are We Doing Here podcast. If you didn't, I still have to provide an answer for the three people that did ask. So, What Are We Doing Here goes back to when I was in college. It was a long time ago. But I remember it like it was yesterday. Nah, I'm just kidding. I just really wanted to use that sound effect. I'm big into sound effects, but I mean, come on, do you really think I was gonna get all Saved by the Bell on you right now? I don't get that kind of production value yet. Look, the reason why it's called that is because when I was in college, I lived very, very close to my school. So it was easy for me and my friends to just go back to my house and we'd drink a ton of beer and a ton of whiskey and we would just hang out and talk BS. And then my dad would show up at like midnight and there were plenty of late nights there. We'd be there till like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning just talking about random stuff. Mostly it was movies and stuff. But I really liked that and that was the inspiration for the podcast. So look, this is episode 1 of the What Are We Doing Here podcast. The first episode is with my dad, my favorite person in the whole world, Mr. Carl. We're going to talk about movies that inspired the genre, okay? So this is episode 1, part 1. There is going to be a part 2 because, man, did we ramble on. We were just 6 beers deep and we were just going and going and going. So we broke this up into a 2-parter entitled The Courtship of Ibby's Father. Now, before we start the episode, I just want to say, if you have any questions for us, if you want to request topics for us to talk about, you can go ahead and reach us at whatarewedoingherepodcast@gmail.com. That's whatarewedoingherepodcast@gmail.com. You can also like us on the Facebook. You can also like us on the Instagram. Instagram is owned by Facebook. Fun fact, they make you work twice as hard. I don't get it, but I'm also going to make that joke at the end of the podcast. So stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy episode 1, part 1, The Courtship of Ibby's Father. Okay, welcome to an untitled podcast. I'm Jason Ibsen. I have my father, Carl Ibsen, who's my co-host here. Say hello, Dad.
Hello, Dad.
We don't have a title for the show yet. I thought heavily on maybe Back for Seconds or No Thanks, I'm Full. I don't have a name yet for this. But basically, today's podcast is going to be just a discussion on films that my dad and myself have seen that kind of inspired the genre for us. Movies that made us appreciate the genre, which therefore went ahead and sparked the interest in the genre specifically. So I know my dad is a big science fiction horror film buff, so it's mostly going to be, we're going to start with that, I feel like. So you mentioned before the interest when you were a kid with grandma with the science fiction creature features. Why don't you talk a bit about that?
All right, being 62 years of age, you're going to have to give me a little bit of latitude and dates and recollections. But
Yeah.
as a kid, I used to enjoy watching movies with my mom. Sunday afternoons was a big afternoon. $1 Million Movie was the name of the programming, and everything from murder mysteries to early horror movies. Horror being Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, Wolfman, The Invisible Man, and my introduction to some of the earlier actors, Boris Karloff, you had Lon Chaney, Bela Lugosi, with just a few that were burgeoning out, getting into what has now become horror films. Back then, in the day, there wasn't much of a gore type horror genre. It was just an old-fashioned black and white scary movie with very early makeup that was pretty good for its time, but we all know how that evolved over the years. So my interest in that started very, very early in my youth.
Okay. One of the things that I always found, appealing with you was when, I always knew of all those stories you would tell me with watching those films with Grandma. I also remember, me as a kid going over there and watching, The Twilight Zone, which gave me a huge appreciation for that, to the point where I have every episode on DVD. I remember going to Disney's Hollywood Studios and making that reservation at the Sci-Fi Dine-In and just seeing your eyes just go wide. Remember you actually recognizing a lot of the commercials because they took the commercials from that time period.
I like the way that they did it. They played snippets of some of the commercials for the movies, the coming attractions, segments of movies of the time, and yes, a lot of it was and you got to include Outer Limits in that as well. Rod Serling, I think, was the narrator for
Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone, and a lot
which
of the
arguably he set the tone for every episode. Like he put you in it even before the story began. I feel like
absolutely. In his personal life, very heavy chain smoker. I don't know if that added to a very distinctive voice.
Well, that was also the time period too, because around that time it was very prevalent with cigarette ads. I remember.
Because it was a glamorous thing to do.
Yeah, Lucy and Ricky, they'd always have the commercials where they would promote cigarettes and whatnot.
Absolutely, and you'd have the Western flavored commercials, for Winston, and that's how the Marlboro Man came out. And
so I think that was just the time period itself where it was a
very glamorous time, and air travel, jet air travel was just starting to come out during that period of time too. But that science fiction theater, the diner, was a great experience for me because it was all encompassing for me. I was able to have some of my favorite foods because diners were very prevalent back in the 50s and the 60s and whatnot. Not so much for me and my family. We really didn't do a lot of diner eating. That came later in my life.
Also living on Long Island, there's one on every block.
I know. And being down here in Savannah, they're kind of scattered. There's only 4 I can think of with all the places that I've been to down here in the South. It's not a very big eating style.
And unfortunately, they all suck down here.
Yeah, that's one of the things too. And I guess Greek people just don't like it down here.
I don't know, but I always said whoever wants to open one from a Greek family in New York, if they came down here, they'd be multimillionaires.
They would do very well because there's a lot of New Yorkers down here, even if they're not patronized by, Southern indigenous people.
Right.
There's a lot of us Northerners that are down here that would, definitely inspire somebody with a good business sense that would be a good thing. But
let's get back to the genre because the Diner podcast is episode 13 and that's a 3.5 hour podcast.
If you remember, didn't the original Blob movie, didn't it take over a diner with all the patrons in it?
I mean, I don't recall.
It was a diner style restaurant that came through, and
I remember watching the remake. I'm not sure if I ever seen the original one.
The original one was back in the 50s, so it would definitely be during that period of time and experience as well.
So now we're talking about all these films in that genre of. I do want to separate science fiction and horror. I would lean more so. Well, I'm sure that's debatable when it comes to the Blob. I'm sure that could be recognized as science fiction or horror. It's kind of right there at 50-50, I feel like. But what horror film? Because I'm assuming we can call the Frankenstein and all that early genre horror more so instead of science fiction.
absolutely.
So, what was the film that did it for you as far as, because I'm going to ask you about that later on as far as other genres. What was the film that went, wow, I love this genre, I'm excited to see more about it?
Frankenstein.
The original one with
Original
Boris
one
Karloff?
with Frankenstein, with Boris Karloff. I mean, like I said, the makeup for that time and whatnot, and you got to remember, it's still, that's black and white
Right.
as well. I'm not sure if the movie had been colorized. I haven't seen it if it is, but black and white horror movies are just absolutely, I think, the best medium for watching that type of movie. Color is great and everything else like that, but again, I'm dating myself. This is what I grew up with. This is what I'm used to. This is what I enjoy. But yeah, for me, Frankenstein started it.
Well, to interject with that, I have to say that one of the things that they don't do too much nowadays, depending on who your director is, that they did a lot back then, is they relied heavily on the music to set the tone. You don't see that too often.
Yeah,
a lot of eerie sounds that kind of make you...
You can close your eyes
Yeah.
and still be able to follow along.
Mm-hmm.
To a certain degree. Musical scores and stuff like that, I mean, have become so identifiable with particular movies.
Jaws.
Sounds, yeah, it's immediately recognized. But back in the day, I mean, for what they had, technology and whatnot, they relied on makeup and wardrobe and things of that nature, but just...
Well, they took more pride, I feel like, in the story. Where now it's just blood and gore, like the Saw films.
Well,
There's really no... Not the shit on the Saw films, but it's more plot-driven with the old stuff.
I think with the old stuff, too, is that it gave the actor a lot of wiggle room to develop the character, and I believe a lot of improvisation. A lot of things were added as they went along.
Right.
And I don't know how many takes and how many rehearsals they did for that, this or the other thing, but you were kind of script-wise, it was contained in a box, and it was left up to the actor to think outside of the box.
Well,
to
also
fully develop the.
There was also, like, with other films, like you had mentioned before we started the podcast, that movie with Aaron Eckhart where he played Frankenstein.
Oh, it was absolutely one of my favorites.
But he had other material to study, and then add his own personal flair to it as an actor. But about those older films, there was no reference point other than the book itself.
Well,
so a lot of this had to be created by the actor and the actor alone. Yes, probably through some of the guidance through the director and also the script writer and whatnot. But other than that, it was mostly the actor and the actor alone. Unlike when you have films constantly regurgitated with the same story as Hollywood does nowadays, there's no frame of reference.
Well, I like it when they interject different arcs into a movie. I like multiple things going on at the same time. Where I get lost is when they take you back 2 years, they take you back 100 years, then they fast forward 10 years, and then they fast forward another 2 years, and then they go backwards again.
You mean like the Tarantino style of film?
Yeah, which is okay in itself and whatnot, but it's not something that I find, particularly entertaining. It's not that I'm a dim bulb and I just want to have things done for me.
You find you're working too hard to follow the story?
Yeah, I'd rather use my imagination more in things as far as, what the set would really look like if I was transported to that particular time. Because remember, when we watch a movie, it's done on a set.
Mm-hmm.
When I get entertained, and I'm not sure about everybody else, but I would hope that it's the same, that you actually, transpose yourself to that time. It's not a set; it's a real thing.
Right.
And as actors develop their character, I like being in on that.
Mm-hmm.
I like seeing what the actor does with the character.
Mm-hmm.
Some things are formulaic. Some actors, they stay strictly on script.
Right.
Either because the director sits there and goes, "This is exactly what I want.
Right.
We're going to follow this.
There's
This
no
is
room
not
for
out of the box.
improvisation.
There's no wiggle room.
Right.
You do your best to keep it along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like listening to your favorite band that just came out with a new album and there's a song on there that you really just explodes, and then when you go see them live, they do it a little bit different, or they do a different interpretation on it.
It's never going to sound the same as the studio version.
Some of your bands are pretty good with that. I would have to say that Motley Crue, in that respect, they play their songs.
I can agree with that.
The way the
mean,
album is.
I've seen them twice, so I can agree with that.
Being a guitar nut that can't play a lick, I think Mick Mars is one of the only people I can think of besides the recently deceased Eddie Van Halen, which was nothing short of a tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
But Mick Mars, he went out and he performed, and it sounds just like the record.
Right.
There may be a little piece here or there, but the whole song dynamic does not change because they're live.
Mm-hmm.
So
But, to give an example of people who do a slight, they go off the beaten path, a slight variation that I do appreciate is, I think I told you this when I saw Billy Joel at the Garden about 3 years ago, and he did scenes from an Italian restaurant, and he had this backup musician, which I really appreciate. He gave him his time in the sun to really explore his abilities. He went and started singing Pavarotti before they interluded into scenes of Italian restaurant, which I thought was absolutely incredible. So in that, you have to be the right person in order to do it right.
Well, Billy Joel is a very unique individual. I remember seeing him at Fulton Street.
Yeah, I remember you were telling me. Yeah.
It was in Farmingdale,
Long
Island.
I want to stay in the genre of movies, but this is too good of a story where you have to tell the story again.
It lends to, even though this is like a side trail, we got distracted. Ooh, shiny things. Kind of thing.
That could easily be the name of the podcast,
But
Shiny Things Podcast.
it's easy to sit there and see similarities between musicians and actors. A lot of times, very successful actors want to be a musician, and very successful musicians want to be an actor. Sometimes, the good ones can make that transition.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a sports figure,
tell me,
Bo Jackson, who could play football and could play baseball.
But let's put a pin on the genre for a second. I got to hear this Billy Joel story again. I think whoever is listening is going to enjoy this, especially from Long Island.
Billy Joel was playing, and we really didn't know at the time
how huge he was going to be.
Well, not only that, it was like this is like the mid 70s, late 70s, and stuff like that. And at that time, Led Zeppelin was huge. Rolling Stones, huge. I mean, blues-based rock and roll was just at its apex. I mean, it was, the amplification was getting better, the equipment was getting better, but me and a couple of my friends, or my friends and I, we stumbled literally into this bar, and it turned out to be a piano bar, and behind the piano was the Piano Man.
Mm-hmm. This was Farmingdale, New York?
This is Farmingdale, New York. Fulton Street Pub, I believe it was called. And, dates just escape me. But we sat there, and he's there by himself, obviously, and he just was as drunk as we were, but his music was different. And we didn't stay long, because he was getting close to the end of his last set.
Any recognizable songs that you could remember from back then? I know no one's gonna eat you lunch if you don't remember, but
Basically, it's Piano Man.
mm-hmm.
When his album came out, like a year later, or 9 months later, or something like that, it was like, holy shit, we saw this guy,
Right.
you know. And I bought the album, and I don't think there's a track on there that I didn't like. And back in that day, I was into Slade, ZZ Top, Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones. I'm probably going to offend a lot of people who listen to this podcast. Not so much a Beatles fan. I like what they've done for music.
Right.
I don't think it would be what it is today without them.
Sure.
But there are certainly other people that made a valuable contribution to what I was listening to then.
Right.
And I really haven't strayed much to my favorites when it comes to that. But that's why it's important for me to identify with a movie, whether it doesn't matter what genre, it's the soundtrack to the movie. The music of a movie or the sound effects in a movie are just as important as a good showing by an actor or a good script or a good story.
Right.
We have so many visual platforms to be entertained with today, you know, with the advent of Netflix and
YouTube, Amazon,
YouTube, and, you know, your cable channels and stuff like that. You know, sometimes I got over 300 channels that I can watch here in my house, and when I look at a movie that looks interesting and read a small clip on it, 10, 15 minutes into the movie, I'm like, okay, that's 15 minutes of my life I'm never going to get back. And I skip and I go to the next thing.
Meanwhile, when you were a kid, it was like 3 channels or bust.
Literally had 3 channels on a black and white TV, but different time.
Right.
You know, I spent most of my time outside as every other kid did. Nowadays, especially nowadays, and you're talking 50 years later, 55 years later, I mean, kids are entertained. They don't have to go outside of their room.
Right.
There's so many electronic devices that bring entertainment and bring the world to you.
At the touch of a button.
At the touch of a button, instant gratification. And, you know, you lose a lot. I think the advent of the cell phone is to blame for a lot of that.
Yeah.
But like anything technology touches, it has good ramifications and it has bad ramifications. In the stories of movies now, some movies have to be played in black and white to fully appreciate the artistry of it.
Right. Well, I know you're not a huge fan of him. I am, as director Kevin Smith and writer. When he did Clerks, I believe 93, if I'm not mistaken, he did that film in black and white, and not a lot of people understood why. And he just wanted to do it in black and white. I'm sure there was another underlying reason why he did. I don't recall off the top of my head, but a lot of people are like, it's 1993. What the hell am I watching this in black and white? And he just went and did it, and I thought that gave the whole movie black and white. I thought it gave a good I don't know what the word I'm looking for, that je ne sais quoi, that underlying tone that he was looking for. I thought it was really neat how he did it, and some people just didn't get it.
I think you have to go back and you have to think of people's mindsets and how they process things. I don't really see it with the generations that came after me. I would think that my generation is the last one that predominantly looks at life in general in black and white. It's either yes or no. It's either black or white. It's not gray. It's not maybe. It's yes, no, black, white. Is that the way everybody should filter and process things? No, you do what you feel you're comfortable doing. You and I have always enjoyed watching movies together.
Oh, yeah.
And the takeaways from the movies after we would watch the movie and then discuss it afterwards, you picked up certain things, I picked up certain things that you didn't pick up, and vice versa.
Well, the reason why I wanted to go do this podcast was because I can't think of how many times, and hopefully we'll get them on soon, where, when I was in college, it'd be 1 o'clock, 1:30 in the morning, you'd be coming home, and I got Dane, Cole, and Joe in the kitchen, and we've been drinking all night, and you just belly up to the bar, pour yourself a glass, and we just go off until 3:30 in the morning talking about film. Because there's an appreciation. Yeah, we were all actors. Yeah, we did study it. You didn't do that, but you were still a fan of film. And it just flowed. And that's why I felt it was important to get this on, in the airwaves so we can watch it at a moment's notice.
You guys, you brought a respect to the medium.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you may not have liked certain things an actor did or a director did or the
we
set
found
was
appreciation
wrong,
in something.
there was an appreciation for the effort that was put into trying to tell a story. I would have to say 50%, and it seems like a very large amount. But I do watch a lot of movies. I watch a lot of TV and stuff like that because I want to be entertained by that. I like sitting in my cushy chair. I'm retired. But it's something that I always enjoyed doing. I was always a guy on the go. That I'm slowing down with now, but I got definitely a renewed energy about being entertained by somebody or something. And the one thing that hasn't changed is my taste in my likes and dislikes. But I will always try something. It's like a new food.
Right.
It's like, okay, it looks like shit. And, sometimes it'll taste like that.
Right.
But I don't back away from it.
Sure.
And I'm not one that sits there and, I'm going to take this guy's word for something. I need to experience it for myself so I can draw my own conclusion.
Right.
Because what if that guy was wrong? In his assessment of something or his recommendation or lack of recommendation, I would have missed out on something, especially if I had the opportunity to try it.
I can't tell you how many times I recommended a movie that I loved that I gave to you. You watched and you go, what is this garbage?
Well, let's see. What comes to mind?
I don't know. I don't think you got enough fingers on your hand to go tell me.
The one was Super Troopers. That comes to mind.
Comedy classic.
The other one was something about the universe.
Something about the universe.
Yeah.
Was that the one where the guy was? He was the oldest. He was a caveman. He was the oldest. No.
I'm trying to remember what it was. It was
Last
your
Man on
turn to
Earth.
pick the movie, and we went to this thing, and I sat there for the hour and 45 minutes and just was ready to suck my own eyeballs out.
And he was what?
Huh?
He was what?
No, I says I was.
No. But you were saying what was it? What was the premise?
Something about the universe in the title.
Something about the universe. I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. So you had just to go back because we went off on a huge tangent, but I'm glad we did because there's that freedom. We're podcasting. There's freedom to go, take a baseline and just walk. We finished horror films. I'd say. Well, I didn't go yet, but I'll keep mine brief. I think as it pertains to horror films, I could get artsy and say I thought Silence of the Lamb was great, but that was an Academy Award-winning film. But I will say,
would you throw that in
horror films?
Horror genre?
Absolutely.
Not a thriller?
Well, psychological thrillers as well as horror films could be a subcategory, yes. But I thought, if you weren't afraid of Hannibal Lecter and everything that Anthony Hopkins brought to that character, to the point where it was bone-chilling, that's exactly what horror film is meant to do. It's supposed to scare the shit out of you.
Well,
it doesn't necessarily have to be vampires, werewolves, and mummies and
made-up creatures.
Creatures.
Hannibal Lecter could have been your doctor and your next-door
Absolutely.
neighbor. Whereas the Wolfman, I'm sure.
But I will go ahead and say, we come from different time periods, different generations. So I will say probably for me, I saw this film probably when I was 9, and I even to this day I'm not a huge horror film person. I can appreciate and when I say classics, I say I'm meaning more so the 1980s with your Aliens. Well, that's more science fiction, but yes, horror. Horror can be arguably said about that. Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, exactly. So that I could go ahead and say. But as far as a horror movie that I truly did enjoy, and you might laugh when I say this, The Lost Boys with Kiefer Sutherland.
Loved it.
I absolutely thought that probably is one of my top horror film movies. And it's probably the only horror movie I ever bought on DVD.
See, for me, it's... When I started watching the black and white initial horror movies, Frankenstein, The Mummy, et al., they weren't a big part of the market. Westerns were big back then. Murder mysteries, you had Jackie Chan and, people like that.
Well, the 1950s,
Sherlock
it was more
Holmes, Basil Rathbone.
glitz and glamour.
Well, now it's the... And I don't want to put all blood and gore things in the slasher bin.
It's not. I consider it
but
to be shock features.
Slasher movies, I'm not real crazy about. Remember, you're investing an hour and 15 minutes to 2 hours, 2.5 hours in a movie and stuff like that you'll never get back if it turns out to be a flopola. But these movies that come out and it's just gratuitous gore,
right,
becomes campy. And I don't mind campy. One of my favorite campy, I guess, blood and gore movies was Reanimator.
Yeah.
I mean, there were some very humorous parts in that. I was laughing my ass off because of the absurdity of it, of what I was watching at the time. But it had a beginning, it had a middle, and it had an end. It had very good special effects for the time. I believe that was the early 80s.
Yeah.
And there were some very good actors in there as well. And it was creepy.
Yeah.
I was sufficiently entertained. I loved it. But I would still put it in the campy category than slasher because of the absurdity and the humor that went along with it. I don't think the movie really took itself serious. Jeffrey Combs, who was the main actor in it, I couldn't think of anybody else better to play that part.
I remember you talking with Joe about this, our good friend Joe Winchell. I'm sure he's going to listen to this at some point. Reanimator and Basket Case. I always remember you talking with him.
Wow, Basket Case, yeah. It was in the days of renting videos from small little mom and pop shops and whatnot, and they'd have one copy of just about everything. It was fun to go there and look around and see what was issued. And
well, for me,
I brought home Basket Case, and the movie creeped me out.
Right.
Because you really didn't.
I never
get to see.
I never saw Basket Case, and I never saw Reanimator.
Well,
and a third film that you and Joe talked about was Puppet Master.
Oh, Puppet Master, the original Puppet Master, creeped me out. And when I say a movie creeps me out, it actually makes my spine tingle, and I'm always waiting for the hand on the shoulder from behind. And I don't mean that in any other context other than having the shit scared out of me. That's where I'm going with that. So I don't want to confuse anybody with that. Yeah, Pop went rogue.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean that was definitely a tingle time. And if you're entertained that way, not to the point where I have nightmares and then I'm going to wet the bed and stuff like that, but I would have to say the movie that disturbed me the most was not a slasher movie, was not a blood and gore movie, was not a horror movie or a monster movie. And I'm taking a little bit of a segue away from this. The one that really I thought about for a while and replayed a lot of the movie in my head was Schindler's List.
Okay. All right, so drama.
I do not... intend on carrying this conversation politically or the rights and wrongs and the humanity. It was just the inhumanity of something that was true. It was not a made-up fictional thing. That in itself was that was a true horror show right there for me.
Yeah.
And still to this day, probably the one that has made an indelible impression on me to this day. And that movie's what, 20 years old, 25 years old. To this day, I can't even look at Ralph Fiennes. You know, I associate, unfortunately, he's got a terrific body of work, and some of his other movies I've enjoyed, especially the Harry Potter series,
Right.
but you really can't tell it's him.
Right. Sure.
But yeah, that was a genuine horror movie for me.
You know what? A nice anecdote about that film that I read actually recently. I did not know. You know, you hear more and more since he's been gone for a couple of years now. Robin Williams, when you hear some of the things that he's done, bit by bit, some new things are coming up. One of the things that he would do is when Steven Spielberg was filming Schindler's List, Robin Williams would call him up just to get him to laugh, just to give him some pleasure, because he was directing that film could not have been an easy task. It's not an easy task for a director to direct a film in general, but on that topic itself, he would call and just try to get him to laugh.
The research that
goes into
Spielberg
absolutely
did was evident at the end of the movie when they showed you the survivors of the concentration camps, and you're talking to people who lived the nightmare.
Right.
We read about it.
Yeah.
We see movies. We see movie reels from the military that have been released and stuff like that. And you cannot put the context together. I can only imagine what it's like to sit and speak with somebody who was actually there.
Sure.
And it's supposed to bring humanity to the forefront, and unfortunately it put a very, very bad face on it. Not just for the German people, not just for the German army and the Nazis and everything else
civilization
like that,
itself.
but civilization itself. We as human beings, we're all going to be measured by that because we all have the capability to do horrific things.
Right.
And
that was a movie that everybody saw.
And theaters are a way to escape some of that. I appreciate what Mr. Spielberg did. It was probably a movie that had to be made.
Yeah.
You could never make a movie like that again. Because of the real people that were there. And, you know, that's 70 some odd years ago.
Right.
Almost 80 years ago. And people are just not here.
Right.
I mean, you know, we're all getting up there. I mean, my father passed away at 87. He was in Korea. The guys that are the old guys now are the Vietnam veterans.
Right.
You know, they're in their mid-70s or early 70s and whatnot. And if there are any stories that need to be told, or any history that needs to be told, we need to do it now.
Right.
Because after all these people are gone, it's hearsay. So, yes, I want to be entertained by movies. The genre of monster movies, which is what it was called back in the day, was very profound for me. I was entertained by it. It captured my imagination. Not that I wanted to have, you know, stick bolts on my neck, have a flat top haircut, and walk around in monster boots.
Right.
But yeah, that started for my interest in that genre. But if I was only able to watch a genre of movies for the rest of my life because nothing else was available to me, it would have to be science fiction. I'm a huge science fiction buff.
All right, so
one of my favorite.
I was going to say segue to science fiction now. So we're done. We've put a cap on horror for now.
Well, that's where it started for me because you know I have a lot of friends of mine. they don't watch a lot of TV.
Right.
They don't know actors' names. They don't know what movies these people were in and stuff like that. I have a very limited knowledge of things. I have my favorite actors and actresses.
No, I got to give you some credit. You're pretty well versed into it, and that's why it was so easy to talk with you when my friends were over, because we're all film buffs and theater buffs and whatnot, and you just bellied up to the bar and you just let it all out. And to watch guys like Joe, who's guy's got more movies in his room that I've ever seen. He's got quite the collection. And the fact that he was able to play off you and throw some movies at you, and you're like, yeah, I saw that movie in high school. Or, yeah, I saw that movie in college. And he knew, maybe he could count the people he knew on his hands who have seen that kind of movie, and you're one of them. You're pretty well versed when it comes to cinema.
The only thing I have up on you guys is the advent of things, the beginning of things. Hollywood is a place I would like to visit. I wish I was able to visit it
In its heyday.
in its heyday.
Sure.
When MGM ruled the roost.
John Wayne.
And you had, we could do a podcast for a month and not touch on every actor
Sure.
that we like,
Mm-hmm.
that we dislike, and it's easy for me to like and dislike somebody that's an actor or an actress, but it's not because of race, it's not because of gender,
Political affiliation.
If you strip all of that nonsense away, anybody who has an appreciation for the arts, whether it's theater, whether it's movies, whether it's television, whether it's live, anybody that has that interest and can make a contribution, and not just for the entertainment value of it, there's always a story to be told. And I just love watching the different ways that people tell a story, because there's a million ways to tell the same story,
Right.
depending on the person who's telling it.
Sure.
And that's what I like.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could get,
Because you could tell a lot by that person how that film
it all comes out.
meant to them.
It all comes out. When you mentioned Robin Williams before, and he's been a huge favorite of mine for many years for comedy.
Yeah.
Good Morning Vietnam is one of my favorite
Sure.
movies from him. Not because of my fascination with the Vietnam War era, but because of the character that he developed. And there was a lot of ad-libbing. There was a lot of Robin Williams in that movie that was not scripted.
Right. Well, that could be arguably said about every film he's done.
Oh, absolutely. But
Exactly.
you're talking about the Vietnam War.
Right,
You're
right,
talking
right.
about
Sure.
a war that was not popular in the United States.
Not at all.
A pretty tender subject with the people that are still alive that went through this shit back in the day. And I'm not going to presume to know how these people feel, but it's probably not a good feeling.
Right.
But getting back to Robin Williams, my appreciation for him as a human being came more with more serious roles he did.
I was just gonna, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think we've mentioned this quite a few times before. With Robin Williams, I cannot think of another actor or actress or what have you that has been typecast for a specific genre, that was able to get himself out of that hole. You have actors who are labeled as a specific person, as a specific character that they've played, and forever they're going to be either the funny guy or the action hero or this or that. The fact that he was able to go ahead and do strictly comedy, arguably that's what he's known for, but to go ahead and do a film like 1 Hour Photo, Good Will Hunting, What Dreams May Come, all these serious films, Insomnia, films that are tearjerkers, films that make you think, films that are just like, that just hit you right in your heart.
Completely out of the box for him.
That's it. And he was successfully able to go ahead and get recognition and be able to do those things where they asked him to do it again. You've got guys who aren't able to really do that. I feel like guys like Adam Sandler who have done it, I think he's done it like 2 or 3 times where he's tried to do serious roles. And I think he does pretty well with it. But still, I feel like it's something that he has to ask for. He's not, hey, would you like to go do this? I think Robin Williams is probably the only person, I could be wrong, but I think he's one of the only people who have been able to not only step outside that box that he put himself in, but to knock it out of the park where he was asked for specific roles, not of that genre that he was known for in the future.
I look at it, if the casting directors, I'd like to know, and I don't know who it is who was the casting director for his first serious role, why he chose Robin Williams. What was it that he or she saw in Robin Williams
his first
for the part that they gave him?
His first serious role, was that Awakenings?
I'm not sure, because, you know...
Well, which one did you have in mind that you were referring to?
Well, Patch Adams.
Well, Good Morning Vietnam was before Patch Adams.
Good Morning Vietnam was first. The others, 30-minute photo, that came later.
Yeah.
Awakenings came later.
Mm-hmm. Awakenings was early 90s, if I'm not mistaken. Good Will Hunting was like 97.
Well, that was close.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. I don't want to say with any kind of certainty as to what.
What would be the one that did it for you with him?
As far as a serious.
Yes.
Patch Adams.
Patch Adams. Yeah.
Because he was able to be him. He was able to interject that, and he literally made himself a clown. Mm-hmm. He's a physician, and he he wore the nose, and it just to sit there and try to do comedy for kids that are playing cancer patients and stuff like that on a children's ward in the hospital. That's a daring move.
Oh yeah,
because you're entering a realm that a lot of people don't find funny. Mm-mm. Especially for people that have had their children in a ward like that and having to go through something like that. But he did it with taste. He did it with respect. He accomplished what he wanted to do.
Right.
I feel.
Yeah.
I didn't talk to him about it, obviously. But to be able to transition from the doctor in a white coat with a red nose, making children laugh, making balloon animals and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden a colleague gets killed.
Right.
How do you make that emotional transition from all of this?
I mean, again, I didn't know the man, you didn't know the man, but
no.
I mean, it takes a very special person to be able to have a shred of willpower to do that on screen.
I would say we got a glimpse inside Robin Williams of the personal torment he was going through. I can't speak with any kind of authority or knowledge on what he went through, but for him to go out in that fashion, he was either in a lot of pain or he really hated himself.
Right. Yeah, I think he was in a lot of pain.
Very, very, difficult for the emotional swings to go from one side to the next and stuff like that. And he really showed you a lot of depth of what he was able to do, but how much of it was he pulling from personal experience?
Sure.
So, you speak of the great ones all the time, like, and go as far back as Clark Gable. And you got
Steve McQueen.
Oh yeah, Steve McQueen and Paul Newman. You John Wayne, Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart. All the classic heavy hitters back in the day. You could even go Bogart and Garfield and those. You sit there now and you look at guys like Al Pacino, whose body of work is
Speaks for itself.
I'm going to say it's endless. I mean, he and I would have to think the one that probably was the most challenging for him. I wish I could ask him if it was Scent of a Woman.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, that was like nothing else he had ever done.
Sure.
And
this was before, if I'm not mistaken, this was before, because when Jamie Foxx did Ray, off of Ray Charles,
right,
they had special contacts to make him blind. I don't think that was the case with Al Pacino. I don't think the technology was there just yet. So he had to go ahead and truly pretend he was blind, and I think he would just stare at a specific point. But if that's all he did, I'd like to think there was more to it, because the way he did it, you'd think he was blind.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, he did it so well.
You got no indication from his facial movements, his eyeballs, or anything else.
Yeah, there was no shift in the eyes.
To let me know he could see.
Right.
If I was just to make an assessment of him, with 5 other people in the room and sit there, show us the blind person.
Right. Yeah.
Him. Pacino.
Right.
He's blind. So there's acting, there's portraying, and then you have your Daniel Day-Lewis's.
Oh, geez. Well, hold on. We're doing a deep dive right now. So let's get. We could talk. Listen, when it comes to drama, we could talk about Daniel Day-Lewis till the cows come home.
Well, we're not talking about just a particular genre. What we're talking about is the depth of an actor and what doing a role means to actors. And actors can save a crappy written movie.
I will agree with you to a point, because let me tell you, Daniel Day-Lewis, he did some dog films.
He's not one of my favorite actors.
Oh, I think he's phenomenal as an actor, but I'm saying someone of the caliber of Daniel Day-Lewis can't save a film. He can make it better than it was with an unknown or someone who wasn't as great. But I think there was a movie called 9 that he did, which was not good. But
Last of the Mohicans was probably.
You got My Left Foot, Lincoln. Probably my favorite film that he's ever done was I like There Will Be Blood, but my favorite film was Gangs of New York with him. As far as a film that he's done.
Oh, look, you're going to have your favorites.
Yeah.
And having a favorite actor it's such a broad spectrum of likes and dislikes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a personal taste as well. I mean, you mentioned some people, and I mentioned some people, actors, male, female, black, white, whatever. We can agree to disagree, but I think you and I both examine not just what we see, but what we interpret as well.
Sure.
Because a good actor is not going to give away everything. I mean, I don't mind thinking during a movie,
right?
And because I get extremely disappointed when a movie goes through, they introduce you to a character, and they don't fully carry it and develop the character from beginning to end.
Well, yeah.
They end the movie, and it's like, well, what happened to this guy? Well, what happened to this girl?
Well, look, I mean, this is probably the former actor in me and whatnot, but I'm going to go ahead and say there's a completely different take whether you watch a movie or if you watch a movie that has an element that resonates within you. Something you got to feel something.
Well, I just watched a movie again about Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember the name of it, but I think it was Peter Fonda's last movie. And all-star cast. I mean, it was phenomenal. And for those of you out there who do listen to this and haven't seen this movie, see it. I'm going to try and find it before we stop.
I mean, you keep talking. I'll go ahead and try to find it.
Again, it's from the Vietnam era, and it's about soldiers. But the cast comprised of
The Last Full Measure,
The Last Full Measure,
2019.
an absolute must see.
Samuel Jackson, Peter Fonda, Christopher Plummer, Ed Harris, William Hurt. Wow. Okay, you weren't kidding.
No, I mean that was an awesome cast,
I never even heard of this movie.
and each one, I believe, could have played any one of the parts that they played. They took the part and they made it their own. And being that they had to share the stage with, what was there, half a dozen there?
Yeah.
I mean, Christopher Plummer, he's no slouch.
No.
One
William
of my
Hurt.
personal favorites.
Right.
Samuel L. Jackson. He's the hardest working man in Hollywood.
Oh, yeah, 100%. He's got an IMDb page, probably over 100, I think.
William Hurt was a favorite of mine since oh my God, here we go again. His 8 friends that get together when I think a 9th friend had passed away, and they used Kevin Costner's arm and sleeve to portray the guy in the casket.
You got Big Chill.
That's it, Big Chill. The Big Chill. Yep. But William Hurt, great actor. But movies like that and Flags of Our Fathers.
Yeah.
And I mean, the subject matter is powerful.
Sure.
On its own.
Yeah. What was the movie? What was the comedy? It was some comedy in it. I would say it was more comedy than drama, but you've always been a fan of it. It was with the art. We had Bill Murray in it.
With the art.
Yeah, Bill Murray, John Goodman. That movie.
Monuments Man.
Monuments Man.
Oh my
That's another
God.
one.
I must have watched that movie a dozen times, and I still pick up things in it that I missed. Not a huge George Clooney fan, but very good in it. John Goodman, I'll watch him in anything. What did it for me with Bill Murray, and yes, classics like Stripes and Caddyshack and Ghostbusters and stuff, I can't take anything away from him, but what it did for me was St. Vincent. Right up there and I think it came out maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but that thing like almost went to the top of the heap.
Yeah.
For me.
I've heard you talk about that film quite a few times.
He showed me that he had a lot more range than what directors expect of him.
Sure.
Yeah, I think he kind of did Zombieland as a lark. I mean, it wasn't much of a character.
He's done that before. He'll just show up.
He'll just show up and,
as he does in real life, you know.
But yeah, I have to say that St. Vincent, and again, it's Vietnam based.
Yeah. Well, if we're going to talk Vietnam, I think arguably you've got your heavy hitters like Platoon, which is probably my favorite one.
It is. But what I want to say before I forget about Platoon is to see Platoon in a movie theater with a surround sound type setup. I mean, half the movie is the soundtrack to it. I mean, I sat in that movie theater, and if you would have sprinkled water on top of me and had my feet in mud,
I think
I would have thought I was in the jungle there too.
I think that could arguably be said, even though it wasn't the Vietnam War, it was World War II. I think that could be arguably said about Saving Private Ryan.
Saving Private Ryan,
which is probably, if we're talking about war films as a genre, I would probably say that's my favorite one.
Well, it's World War II.
Yeah.
Great cast.
Yeah, sure.
Tom Sizemore.
Yep. Tom Hanks, Matt Damon.
Tom Hanks, probably the actor of my generation, inarguably. But when you talk, Saving Private Ryan, and you talk Platoon, not only were the wars different, I different movie.
Sure. Oh yeah, 100%. But I mean,
Different
as it pertains to sound effects and seeing it surround sound and whatnot, that Battle of Normandy scene in the very very beginning, to watch that in surround sound. I had that on. I got the 4K TV upstairs in the man cave, and I got the surround sound in there. That is one film where if I want to show people the surround sound, that's what I put on. Is that
And I
opening scene.
think the takeaway of that scene,
Yeah.
nobody will forget that GI who's looking for his arm
Oh yeah,
on,
yeah. Yep.
on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
You may forget about everything else you saw, but that image of that soldier wandering around looking for his arm that was shot off.
But to
was just
start
like,
a film
boom.
that way,
Yep.
no one knew what they were getting. Then I'm sure some people were like, "I'm about to go see a war movie," but to start opening credits and boom, Battle of Normandy, and the way it was shot.
Oh, the cinematography in throughout the whole movie.
Yeah.
Was, I mean, I haven't watched anything like that, but substance-wise, acting-wise, and everything else like that, I would have to say my favorite war movie is Platoon.
Mm.
But I just watched something that was done by Charlie Sheen about the preparation that was done for that movie, what Oliver Stone made those guys go through.
Oh yeah.
They had it was filmed in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody has seen this special. I think it was on Netflix. It's worth the watch.
I listened actually today to a podcast that had Charlie Sheen on, and he had a helmet from his father from Apocalypse Now that he brought with him. He did the podcast at his house, but he was talking about Platoon, and he was saying that the thing that made him, I don't want to say feel like shit, but after they were all staying in the same hotel, but when an actor wrapped up on the project,
They went
home. And he said bit by bit, they would all meet up at a bar in the hotel lobby. And when that actor went home, it was like, wow, this guy's really gone. And now they're drinking, and it's just the surviving members, so to speak. And that was the moment. He says he didn't even feel that way when he was shooting the scene. It was that after effect. Knowing that guy's okay, he hopped on a plane, he's going back home, probably California and whatnot.
Gone. It's the separation.
But it's the separation that hit him emotionally with it. And I thought that was so interesting.
Well, it hit those guys twice as hard because they formed a band.
Sure.
The house band that was playing there was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So Johnny Depp and a
Lawrence
couple of the other
Fishburne.
guys, they all knew how to play instruments.
Yeah. So okay,
They jumped up.
so they must have.
They did it.
Yeah, because
But as
Right.
actors were killed off in the show, they would go home and there'd be a void
Yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah,
band,
yeah.
and then pretty soon there was nobody left.
all right. So the thing you watched, it was pretty much
It
the same
encompasses
story.
that
Yeah.
whole thing.
So you heard mostly the same.
Definitely worth the watch because I didn't realize Dale Dye, he was an actual soldier,
Mm-hmm.
and he's been in all kinds of war movies.
Yeah.
He's the guy with the gray hair that you always see and the mustache
Right.
and whatnot. He put them through a 2-week boot camp.
Sure.
He had them humping 80-pound packs and going through the same shit, eating the same food and everything else like that. I mean, definitely worth the watch. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but Platoon, definitely my favorite war film. I know there's a lot of people out there who think Apocalypse Now was the ultimate movie, and I don't think it's because Marlon Brando and
Martin Sheen.
had anything to do with it, but it was. That's still my favorite war movie.
All right. So we've covered horror, we've covered war films, Let's go to science fiction, and we'll take a quick break. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, when are these two guys gonna shut up already? This was our first podcast. We're very excited about it, and we kind of strayed from the path a bit, but we are going to be splitting these up into 2 separate episodes to help break up the time. A few things before we get back to it. If you're enjoying today's topic, we greatly appreciate it. The podcast will be available at this time on 2 different platforms, on YouTube as well as Apple Podcasts, all for free. The name of the show is going to be called What Are We Doing Here? That's right. What Are We Doing Here? The podcast. If you have any questions or would like to request a topic for us to discuss, or if you just want to reach out and say hello, you can do so at What Are We Doing Here podcast at gmail.com. That is What Are We Doing Here podcast at gmail.com. Please like us on Facebook and Instagram. Bear with us. We're just starting to get into the swing of things here. We're going to be periodically adding new equipment to the show as well, better the quality. And we're going to be having some special guests on too very shortly. So let's dive into science fiction. And we're back.
Yes, we are.
Needed refills.
Where
All right.
do we leave off?
Well, we talked about horror and we talked about war extensively. We've gotten 2 genres down, and it's been an hour. So just to give you an idea. So let's segue to science fiction, because you had brought that up before. So we'll talk science fiction, and then we'll keep it moving along. So science fiction, what really did it for you to make you appreciate the genre?
Landing on the moon
Landing on the Moon.
was what, 64?
The actual landing on the moon? Or
Yeah.
there was a movie called Landing on the Moon?
No,
Oh, okay.
the actual landing on the moon.
That's what really started. Well, how old were you when that happened? So you were in 58, so...
Yeah, 6, 7 years old.
Okay. So before then, no really any history with science fiction?
Science fiction, yeah. I enjoyed outer space movies, anything that had to do with a spaceship, a rocket ship, a
Star
flying
Trek?
saucer.
Star Trek?
Star Trek, I'm not too sure on the dates with that. I think that was 64, 65, and 66, somewhere in there. Huge fan.
Mm-hmm.
I never got into the really early stuff like Flash Gordon, which was in the 30s and 40s, I believe. Never really got into that. But yeah, I mean, anything that had to do with space travel and whatnot. I remember watching James Mason, the actor, in Journey to the Center of the Earth, which was a Jules Verne thought, idea, book. He also did, was it 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with Captain Nemo?
I remember watching Forbidden Planet with you.
Yeah, with Robbie the Robot.
And also Naked Gun's Leslie Nielsen.
There was also Lost in Space came out at the time. Zachary Smith.
Mm-hmm.
Loved it, but you got to remember in the mid-60s and stuff like that, television reception in my house wasn't the greatest. It wasn't until later I was able to watch the Flintstones and everything else, because we didn't get the channels that all this stuff was on.
Yeah.
But I always had a
You mean
fascination.
Freddie didn't splurge for that?
No, there was no splurging to be had during that time. Hey, look, I never went hungry. I never ran around naked because I didn't have clothes and whatnot. But
He had a good job.
it got better as the years went on and stuff like that. He wasn't making a ton of money, but we lived in a single-family house and stuff like that. Great neighborhood. I had a great childhood and stuff like that.
Now, was this in Uniondale, or was this when you were still living in Queens or Bronx?
I really don't remember much of my time in Queens. I lived over by Alley Pond Park.
Okay.
And I think we moved out of there when I was like 4 or 5. And then we moved out to the island, close to the Uniondale Coliseum.
Mm-hmm.
And, there wasn't a whole lot of money for extra stuff. Programming was a lot better with the advent of cable television. And I've told you that story many, many times.
Yeah.
Where my parents wouldn't go for it because we're not paying for TV. You know, it came free off the antenna. If it was good enough for them, it was good. And my father threw up the fact that he was, they only had radio.
Mm-hmm.
And, okay, fine. They had the nickel hot dog, too, with a free beer.
Well, he wasn't also, at that time, he wasn't as big into movies and television. He wouldn't watch, like, The Tonight Show and stuff like that. Or
he
was Late
more
Show and stuff.
Sports minded. He loved watching soccer on TV when he was able to get it.
Mm-hmm.
He liked watching tennis, football. He would watch if there was teams that he was interested in. But the advent of cable television also opened up things, and we also didn't go to the movies much either.
Right.
We did go to a couple of outdoor screens. Salisbury comes to mind right now, where we had the outside movie theater where they clipped on a little speaker on the window of the car, and
right.
you sat in your car and watched on this ginormous screen.
We did that one time when I was a kid. I don't know if you remember. I don't know where it was. But I was probably like 8. And I remember the movie we were supposed to see, but then it got rained out. You took me to go see Under Siege 2.
Steven
Seagal. And I only remember that because we went there, and all we did was wait, but it was raining. But I remember seeing a poster for Clueless, and that was that Alicia Silverstone movie. So, judging by those two movies, it was probably around 97, 96, something like that.
Yeah, it was probably just before they tore it all down. I understand they're making a comeback now. But
we got 2 here. I don't know if you knew that. We got one in Beaufort, and we got one in Liberty County, if I'm not mistaken.
Hey, look, down here in the South, there's a lot of bugs. There's a lot of weird people. The food is good down here. But I'm not sure I want to share watching a movie being confined in my car with the window open and getting my ass bit up with mosquitoes, jitterbugs, and all kinds of other shit.
Right.
I like my
air conditioning.
4-position chair, air conditioning. I can summon somebody and get me a soda, and
4K IMAX.
I can go right down the stairs.
Recline a chair.
To the bathroom.
Get a jumbo popcorn for $7.
Yeah. I mean, as a kid and everything else like that, it's a lot of fun because it's something different. You're probably with your friends and everything else, but. Yeah, I mean, with the advent of cable TV, I finally had cable put in my parents' house. They had no knowledge that I was doing this, and I thought I had a couple of days to muster up enough courage and a conversation to have with them when they came home. They were on vacation. They actually came home the day it was being installed, so my father launched as soon as he pulled the station wagon up in the driveway and said, "What the fuck is going on?" As a guy was drilling, with a 4-foot...
was this Cablevision?
This was Cablevision that came in, and it was early Cablevision, where you had the box on top of the TV.
What year do you figure?
And the remote was wired to it. I would have to say I was going to college at the time, 77?
77.
76, 77, somewhere.
I remember that old TV set he had, and he had... This thing looked like a brick, the remote control for this television set.
It was our first color Admiral TV.
Wait, that was the first color TV. He still had that when I was around? I just remember the remote control. It was this fat. It looked like an actual brick, this thing.
Admiral. It was a 20-inch or 24-inch or something.
And it lasted that long in the 90s?
Oh, my father could squeeze the life out of anything. That was the
upstairs. Upstairs on the third floor, on the second floor.
No, by then that was probably the Sony Trinitron that we both bought. I bought it for my house, and he went and bought one for his because the console he had upstairs finally crapped out, and the advent of TV repair guys coming to the house and fixing your shit and everything else, that was already working its way out then. We started to get into the age of throwaway stuff.
Right.
So he went and bought a 32 or 34-inch, I forgot what it was, Sony Trinitron, and it was just heavy as hell. But like I said, with the advent of cable TV, there was more programming that was coming into the house, and it was our first indoctrination and baptism to pay TV.
Mm-hmm.
You got X amount of channels depending on if you got the gold package,
Sure.
the silver package, or whatever. And then there was pay-per-view.
Right.
I used to get invited to a friend's house to watch the Islanders play, which was a huge thrill for me because my father wasn't really that much into hockey. There was no chance of me ever being taken to the Coliseum to see the Islanders.
When you lived, you could have walked there where you lived.
Which I did many times when they had concerts and stuff like that. But with more programming systems that came out and whatnot, Hollywood had another medium to deal with. You know, they could do self-produced shows and whatnot. And back when Cablevision first came out, there was no commercials. It was just strictly this show was on. It was on from beginning to end.
And at a certain point, towards the end of the night, there was nothing at 2:00 in the morning. It would just be a blank.
No, Cablevision was like one of the first that came around with around the clock.
Oh, was it?
Programming. When I left home shortly after that, and I said, you know, Dad, this system is in my name. Do you want to keep it, or am I gonna, you know, take this out and everything else like that? I'm gonna have a fucking hole in my wall now and everything. Just leave it there. I'll change it to my name.
That was his excuse for no. I really want the service.
After he asked me out, and oh man, he was livid. That very night, he was upstairs.
That was like you when you bought me a Genesis.
And I'm sitting there and I'm watching a show, and he's like, "Give me the cable box." I give him the box, and he starts flipping around. And it's like, okay, I wasn't watching that, but you know, the cable TV might be my responsibility and mine, but the roof that's over my head is his, and I'm not going to look very cool with this thing sitting in my lap on the curb outside. So from then on, he was just up there every night. But yeah, I mean, I love science fiction. I love anything that has to do with robots.
Well, what film, you know, just to get back, what film was it that went, wow, this is, I want to see more, as far as science fiction, that really blew your socks off?
I would have to say it had more to do with television than motion picture.
Okay. All right, so that's where you were going with this. Okay.
Right. Because I was introduced to Star Trek.
Uh-huh.
And Lost in Space. And the Fireball XL.
Twilight Zone.
Twilight Zone.
Oh, that was
Outer Limits.
Twilight Zone was when you were probably
that was a little bit
infancy.
Later. That was in the late.
No, you were. That was late 50s. Twilight Zone, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it was still viable. I don't know how many years that it ran. There's a lot of episodes and stuff like that. But regular TV programming, not so much a movie, came through. My mom was big into Jules Verne. And they probably made about 4 movies from his books and stuff like that. Journey to the Center of the Earth, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. There's a couple others too that I don't know why I can't remember them. But basically the medium at that time for me with my interest in science fiction came from TV.
Okay.
So still to this day, huge Star Trek fan, even with all the metamorphosing from different captains, different time periods,
generations, and all.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch. But as far as the movie franchise, I believe there were 7 movies made with the original cast. You know, Bill Shatner and company, and then Jean-Luc Picard, the captain of
Patrick
Stewart, who's a Brit, wonderful actor. Unfortunately, he doesn't show the humorous ability that he has. He's funny.
For the 30 seconds that I met him at the airport, sweet man. Sweet man.
Just
looked you right in the eye.
Just a gentleman.
Yeah.
You can tell he's classically trained.
Oh yeah. I mean, he's a member of the Royal Shakespeare Company.
His
And-
version of
Macbeth,
no,
which was filmed.
what's the thing? The Christmas Carol.
Oh, Christmas Carol, yeah.
His version
Mm.
is my most favorite, and up until that, it was when Albert Finney did it.
You're gonna laugh at me though. I I like Muppet Christmas Carol because it had to do with Muppets and whatnot, which is great in itself. But also you've got oh jeez, I'm having a brain fart. Michael Caine, Michael Caine.
Yes.
He was great as Ebenezer Scrooge. Michael Caine. Fuck. So for science fiction, for me,
And a Brit.
and a Brit, yes. Well, typically, yeah. But as a science fiction genre, for me, I remember you always ranting and raving about The Abyss,
Oh,
James Cameron.
the unrated, uncut version.
Yeah. And to go back to
Huge Ed Harris fan, by the way, too.
Mom and pop video stores. I remember in the early '90s, I think Mom was doing a Seder, and
Easter.
something like that. And I remember,
It's
we
Jewish thing.
we weren't exactly full from that because a lot of that stuff was unedible. No disrespect to the
got a
Jewish
bone.
people, yeah, and parsley. Was dipped in
and
water.
dry crackers.
You were like, "Wow, I'm full, thanks, ma." And you were like, "Hey, let's go to." And I remember this as clear as day because the movie I'm about to bring up is my favorite film of all time. You go, "Hey, let's go to Mickey D's," and we went to Mickey D's on Merrick Road or Merrick Avenue, I think, if I'm not mistaken. What street was the public library on?
Freeport?
Yeah, was that Sunrise Highway? No, that's Merrick
North
Road.
Ocean.
North Ocean Avenue. We're on North Ocean Avenue. We go to the Mickey D's on North Ocean Avenue, and we go to that movie store, the video store. Can't remember the name of it, but 100%, it's been out of business
Where?
for 20 years in that same strip mall of the McDonald's on North Ocean. So you take me there, and Terminator 2 Judgment Day just came out, which was made in 1991. James Cameron film as well. And I knew nothing about Arnold Schwarzenegger until that night. You rented the movie for me and we watched it. Now, granted, I was probably about 7 years old. The only movies that I knew at that point that I was big into was Ghostbusters, and still am to this day. Watched that movie, and life was changed as far as cinema and science fiction for me. That movie, to this day, is still my favorite film of all time, but that set the genre of science fiction for me. I think arguably anyone would agree with me that as far as the special effects are concerned, still hold up. Terminator 2 Judgment Day, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Edward Furlong, Lyndall Hamilton, who was married to James Cameron at that time. You even bought me the making of that film too, which I had watched several times after that. The 3D show at Universal Studios I had seen so many times.
You lost your shit.
That was the first stop I had to make whenever we went to Universal Studios. I had to go see that because I was such a huge fan. I've read book adaptations from that. I think there was 3 books made that I had read way before even the sequels came out. Just absolutely loved it. Special effects still hold up to this day, and I love the franchise. And I've seen that movie well over easily 100 times, easily. And that is what does it for me when it comes to science fiction. And then I gained an appreciation for Arnold Schwarzenegger, where you had shown me, I hadn't even seen the first Terminator film. I'd only seen it years after the fact. Because as a kid, I didn't know any better. When I thought Terminator 2, I didn't think sequel. I thought 2 as in 2 Terminators, which Arnold Schwarzenegger and Robert Patrick, haunting character Robert Patrick played. And fun fact, I mentioned this to you the other day. They wanted originally O.J. Simpson to play the Terminator in the first film, which I don't understand. I don't understand that at all. But I thought that was an interesting fact. But that movie did it for me when it came to the science fiction universe. Was that movie, and 100% that movie I should have not seen when I was 8 years old because it's pretty graphic. But a solid flick, still holds up to this day, and probably my favorite franchise of the movie to include The Godfather. So that's science fiction for me. So let's go to another genre. Why don't you pick? I've been kind of steering us and whatnot, but why don't you pick the next genre for us to talk about?
As far as westerns are concerned, I'm very limited with that. Even though one of my favorite shows during I think it ran during the 60s and the 70s, was the Wild Wild West with an actor that was Robert Conrad.
Not to be confused with the Will Smith movie.
Better not be.
That's a joke.
That was an absolute disaster.
Yeah. And you got a powerhouse of an actor like Kevin Kline, who should have not been in that movie.
No, it had nothing to do with the characters of the original TV program.
Of James West.
That what was cool about it was, I think it was on Friday nights at 8 o'clock. And, with commercial interruptions and stuff like that, what they did was at the end of a scene, they would freeze it, and then it looked like they made a drawing copy of the frozen scene. They made like a painting out of it with special effects.
Okay.
And they shot it into a frame that looked like four corners. And those were the 4 commercial interruptions that they would do. And that ended that scene. They'd go to commercial break, restart it. The end of that scene before commercial break, they put the other one, the second one, up there in this quadrant of 4 that you saw on your screen. Mm-hmm. Never really seen anything like that before, but it was very, very cool, because in the beginning of the show, with the credits and stuff like that, they show the same 4 scenes of the franchise. They do that whole pattern, and then they begin the program. And then they start with a new picture. And this runs all the way to the end of the show. For me, westerns were not always a
So there was no movie that did it for you. There was no John Wayne film that did it.
Oh yeah, there was.
Okay, so there was one. Okay, Clint Eastwood.
Clint Eastwood came out with what they called the spaghetti western.
Sure.
And that's where he got his popularity from.
Right.
I'm trying to remember the director, and it was a very popular guy, known for shoot 'em ups and stuff like that, almost like a Sam Peckinpah.
Okay, Joe's a big Western fan. He's seen Fistful of Dollars and A Fistful of More and all that other stuff.
Hang 'em High, all of that stuff. That did it for me. Clint was badass. It was when I saw them for the first time with my mom. They just blew me away. They were not like American westerns, like My Darling Clementine, which is a popular thing. It was the very first accounting of the shootout at OK Corral.
Yeah.
We had the Magnificent Seven, I think it was. But yeah, everybody in Hollywood, especially Fonda.
Peter Fonda?
No.
Jane Fonda?
The dad.
I don't know. I know Peter Fonda.
This is the father. He did, I think one of his last movies, or his last movie was On Golden Pond. Henry Fonda.
Henry Fonda.
Yeah. There were some good American westerns that were out there. Bogart was in a couple.
Was he? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was in a couple.
Because I remember Maltese Falcon, obviously Casablanca.
Oh yeah, no, I mean you
I didn't know he did Western.
You had you had a lot of those guys that did murder dramas, and you know he did his is it Marlowe, the detective stuff and whatnot. That was another thing that my mom was interested in, was detective movies.
Noir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as far as American westerns and stuff like that, yeah, there were some good ones that I enjoyed.
Rio Bravo, I liked.
But
With
you gotta
Dean-
understand,
with Dean.
the westerns that I liked were basically, it was comedy based, or it was a series, a television series.
I was gonna say like Three Amigos.
We had the three parrots down in Disney.
Oh, the Three Caballeros.
Three Caballeros. What was I going to say? TV. TV was F Troop.
Okay.
That took place, in the West. It was a fort, and it was a comedy based thing. And you had the Rifleman with Chuck Connors. You had the Virginian with Barbara Stanton, I think was the actress in that one. And, more shows like that.
So not True Grit or 310 to Humor for you.
No, I never was. I didn't run around with a 6-shooter as a kid, and I had cap guns and whatnot.
I had cap guns too.
Because we went to the same thing. We went to Carson City and all of that stuff, upstate New York and whatnot.
Oh, with the train robberies. I remember that. There's a video of me with that somewhere.
Run through the whole thing as a kid too. That's how old all of that stuff.
I wonder if that's still around today.
It is, but they've kind of pared it down to one, like Storyland that we had gone to, and Carson City and stuff like that. They merged it into something else. It's a shame because it's a part of history, but it's not part of the generations, I would say, after you.
Right.
I mean, things changed, interests changed. I mean,
everyone's going to Disney World instead of that.
You would be very hard pressed to make a Western now and make money.
Well, they remade 310 to Yuma.
Which sucked.
I don't know. I liked it.
Russell Crowe, correct?
I thought it was Christian Bale. I could be wrong.
It sucked.
But to give you an idea how much I remember it.
In my opinion.
Well, yeah.
I did not care.
But not too long ago, I mean, again, this was probably early 90s. My favorite Western that I've ever seen, Tombstone. Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. But that didn't happen when I grew up.
No, that I get that. But for me, I was just a kid then.
I thought Tombstone was great.
Right.
What was the other one from that whole thing? Gene Hackman was in it. Sharon Stone.
Unforgiven? With Bruce Willis?
No, that's with Clint. Unforgiven.
Is it?
Is with Clint. Yep. You see, I'm involved in a program right now. I wouldn't really call it a Western because it takes place in Montana, not because of the location, but it's about a modern day ranch owner.
Talking about Yellowstone.
Yellowstone. And yes, they ride horses all the time because that's what you do on a ranch.
Sure.
And his whole thing is beef, cattle. That's what he does. He owns 50,000 acres up there, and it's about his plight of the federal government trying to take his land away from him.
I watched a couple episodes.
I enjoy it. They got a very good cast. I wouldn't necessarily call it a Western. It's a drama. But that genre, that whole Western thing, was kind of lost on me. A lot of my friends, when I was growing up, they wanted to be cowboys. They wanted to be a sheriff or police officer or whatever the case may be. So, and I don't think I really encouraged that with you either. I didn't really expose you to a lot of
I don't recall it.
Western stuff.
I do remember going.
You were going to do it on your own.
Yeah, I do remember doing the train robbery thing when we went to that thing, but that was I
Well,
always
it was
thought that
more
was
of
fun.
an amusement park
Yeah,
type
yeah,
of
yeah,
setting.
yeah.
But
Okay. Well, for me, it was as far as an appreciation of the genre as well as the acting that went along within it was Tombstone. I would like to, because when I went to Colorado 2 years ago or last year, seeing all of that made me want to go explore more of it and on horseback or see all that good stuff. I mean, even if I went to California, I would want to go to, Spawn Ranch, which was big on. It's popularized because that's where
go to the Bunny Ranch too.
That's in Nevada. Spawn Ranch is popularized because that's my dog I almost stepped on. Popularized because that's where Charlie Manson and his girl stayed at. But before that, it was actually home to where they shot a lot of the Western films. I would love to go explore that area because of the history that went along with it. But for me, it was mostly Tombstone that did it for me as far as that genre is concerned. Let's talk. Well, we talked Terminator, so let's segue into action films to shorten up the podcast a little bit because we are about an hour and a half in right now. I'll go ahead and say, as far as sci-fi and action, I'm going to go Terminator 2 on double because of how much that film impacted me.
I think I would have to go and sit there and base it on franchise.
Okay.
It's just going to be easier for me. Action, back when I was growing up and stuff like that, was basically war movies, army stuff, I mean, I loved the submarine movies like Grey Lady Down and that whole menu. But later on, I mean, action movies, all the ones that Bruce Willis made,
Die Hard
series. I mean, the first one was very good because it was the first one, but the sequels...
Well, first one was good because arguably probably one of the best villains in cinema, Alan Rickman as Hans Gruber.
Yeah.
I mean, he kind of...
his first movie, he played a villain.
Yeah, but I mean, for him, he kind of was in its infancy, was the serious British mastermind. Like, you didn't need muscles, you didn't need a scar on your face, you didn't need that intimidating look. He was the sophisticated Englishman who used wit and smarts, and he also had no emotion. I can't say he didn't have any emotion, but
his emotion was his diction in how he said and framed
right.
words.
I mean, he'd wave the gun around, but he wasn't a maniacal lunatic by any means of the word. I mean, I wouldn't say that as
Die Hard.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that he was just shooting people for the hell of it.
His brother did.
The only person he shot was what's her face's coworker, the guy's wife's coworker.
Hans.
Yeah.
Booby.
yeah.
Oh, please shoot this guy.
Yeah, and he did. But and that movie just, I think he kind of brought something new to an antagonist, to a villain.
Well, I mean, we're going off on a tangent. Alan Rickman, one of my favorite actors. I'm not going to say one of my favorite British actors. I'm going to say one of my favorite actors. He played, I watched it, the owner of CBGB's.
That was filmed in Savannah. I don't know if you knew that.
And no, I didn't.
Yeah, it was filmed on Broughton Street.
I loved it. I thought the movie was great.
Mm-hmm.
He brought a lot of color to the character because it was a very colorful character.
Yep.
His very first movie, he played the antagonist to Tom Selleck in Quigley Down Under.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that was, you can consider that a Western even though it took place in Australia or New Zealand. I forgot which one of the two. But his body of work, I mean, my favorite thing that he was in was Galaxy Quest.
Yeah, it was a fun movie.
And Galaxy Quest winds up on a lot of people's lists for being one of the most organized, all-encompassing movies as far as character development, special effects, storyline, that sort of thing. I love the movie. It's one of my favorites to watch. It's one of my go-tos.
It's just a fun film.
It's absolutely a fun film because there's a fun guy running the show.
Mm-hmm.
Tim Allen is a very funny guy.
Yeah.
I pretty much like him in every movie that he's done. But that one in particular. Sigourney Weaver, very good in it.
Sam Rockwell.
to
take a small part and to go ahead and expand it the way that he did.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
And that's how him. I don't know if you knew this, but Sam Rockwell and Justin Long became friends because of that movie. They're very close friends. Justin Long, it was one of his first big films, was the fan of Tim Allen in that movie.
He was the geek kid.
Yeah.
No, I think Rickman, goddamn shame. I mean, 69 years old, 70 years old and stuff like that. He had so much to give. Notwithstanding his performance as Severus Snape in the Potter series.
You could take all that away, and he was still a powerhouse of an actor. But him as Snape, you probably remember, I wasn't the biggest Harry Potter fan, but because of characters like that he portrayed in that film, made me enjoy the franchise.
I would say, being a fan of the program, being a fan of the books and everything else like that, I believe Snape had a more deep character than Potter.
I would agree with you.
Because on the surface, vocabulary-wise, he was the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
He dressed in black.
Mm-hmm. He
was everything that was supposed to be dark.
Sure. He was repping for the bad team, the Slytherins.
But there was a humanitarian in him.
Mm-hmm. There was love.
And there was love in him. And the takeaway from me with this is that he's closer to Harry Potter than anybody.
He was closer to them than his own parents. Even though Dumbledore kind of played the father figure for him.
He was the father figure.
Yeah.
But
it was Snape was really the one who watched out for him.
Knew who Harry Potter was.
Sure.
Inside and out. He knew him better than he knew himself.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the way that he developed the character, and he didn't have a lot of time in the movies to develop it. It wasn't like the light was on him all the time.
Mm.
The time that his character was called upon and whatnot, that was the only time he was able to really make a character development.
Mm.
It's not like when you got the camera on you for 85% of the movie, that's one thing. You better get your character's demeanor across and what they're all about and everything else. But he didn't have that kind of time. He had like 20%, maybe 15% and stuff like that. So he made good use of the time. I don't know if that's due to him or who the writers were and what they wanted this character to be. But I think if the franchise had gone on for another 5 episodes, not to have him in it would have been a mistake. But I got to be honest, though. I mean, you talk about adventure or action films and stuff like that. Pirates of the Caribbean, the very first one, I remember sitting next to Lauren. The lights went up at the end of the movie, and I sat there and I says, "That is the best fucking movie I have seen."
Hmm.
I mean, everything. I mean, the cinematography, the music, the way that there wasn't a rest period in there. My bladder was busting because I didn't want to miss anything.
Right.
You know? Usually you go out, you go take a leak and stuff like that, you come back and you sit down. I usually don't have to go, what happened? To the person sitting next to me. I can more or less, after about 5 or 10 minutes, figure out, oh, okay, this makes sense now.
Sure.
I got it. But the Pirates of the Caribbean stories and movies, they were great action adventure, or whatever you want to say. Awesome. But as a kid, action movies were a developing genre. There was murder mysteries, there was mysteries, there were comedies. Comedies were big.
Well, what do you figure the first action film was? Charles Bronson? Was that in its infancy?
Yeah, that's in the 70s. I would have to say action movies and whatnot.
Clint Eastwood?
Yeah, Clint Eastwood. I was going to say, like The Enforcer.
Yeah.
Rocky
Dirty Harry?
Was the actual, Dirty Harry, all the Dirty Harry things, Deadpool.
Yeah.
Play Misty for Me. And then he started doing comedies. But comedies were very, very big back when I was growing up and whatnot. Because you're talking about Laurel and Hardy had already passed through.
All right, so let's segue to comedy now that we're on it now. That's a good segue point.
Comedies for me, I enjoy comedies. Some people have got to be in a mood for it and stuff like that. Me, I can watch a comedy anytime. I do like physical comedy.
Slapstick?
I do like that if it's not overdone.
Give me an example of overdone.
Three Stooges.
So
Way over the
solely relying on that.
Solely relying on that. That's what they do. That's their shtick. And that's okay. They were hugely popular and everything else like that. Laurel and Hardy was a little bit more intellectual, physical comedy. I mean, the gentleness of Stan Laurel and the apathy of or empathy of Oliver Hardy.
You know they made a movie on that.
On those two?
On Laurel and Hardy. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I watched.
It came out about a year ago, and again, forgive me because this is not my generation. But who's the big guy? Was that Hardy?
That's Oliver Hardy.
Oliver Hardy. That was played by Steve Coogan was Laurel. Steve Coogan was in Night at the Museum with Ben Stiller, and he played the Roman soldier.
Yes.
With
Yes.
with Wilson.
He's got a brother.
With
Owen Wilson.
Owen Wilson. Fuck, why am I having? I'm gonna have to look it up. I don't know why I'm having such an issue here.
Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy were great. They mixed a lot of physical comedy.
John C. Reilly.
Oh, okay.
They put a fat suit on John C. Reilly. I thought it was good. I enjoyed it. I didn't know. I wasn't part of that time period. So
what I like about the story is that they were genuinely best friends in real life. The comedy team of Abbott and Costello. The understanding is Costello was very difficult to work with, and they actually hated working with each other. It wound up working. So they stayed with it because they had millions of fans and the money was rolling in and everything else like that. But Lou Costello was difficult to work with.
They talked about that in the movie I was just bringing up because they talked about the heyday, and then when they were trying to make a resurgence when Abbott and Costello took over, and they were slightly becoming not as popular, that they were like the new kids on the block.
Well, that's 50s.
Yeah.
But you had other ones that came out, during the same time, like Martin and Lewis. They were excellent together, and then the relationship. There was It was probably a good 10 years difference between them in ages.
I love that dynamic with the dynamic duo, so to speak. It even translated as far as David Spade and Chris Farley. There was always that slapsticky duo-ness. I mean, not to that extent
I
where they
like
had.
it when it transcends just not the project that they're working on. What I like is that the way they are with each other on set is the same as they are off set.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that
Well, Farley and Spade had that.
See, Spade is somebody, I don't know if it's the parts that he plays, like the guy that plays Ross Geller. What the hell is his name?
David Schwimmer.
David Schwimmer. He always plays a dick.
Sure.
You know, that's what this character calls for a guy being a dick. Let's get Schwimmer.
Sure.
He's a dick in every movie.
Well, what about Band of Brothers?
Yes, it was Band of Brothers.
Yeah.
Plays a dick.
Oh, okay.
He plays a training officer who is by the book and no leeway.
So he's a dick. Yeah.
He's a dick.
Okay. Point
When
taken.
you look at somebody and the chemistry pairing of Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, those two guys, you could have put them in front of the camera and just said, go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was such a unique and refreshing dynamic to...
They were one of the first to develop a blooper reel at the end of a film.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Because the blooper reel is absolutely hysterical.
Yeah, they were one of the first to do it. Because they had so much material they had recorded.
Look, DeLuise was always he was always comedy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he did anything
Right.
Serious or dramatic role and stuff like that. Whereas Burt Reynolds, he did everything.
Mm-hmm.
He would go into anything. But he was a character. I mean, Burt Reynolds could do comedy just as quick as get in a car and fly over 14 buses because he started out as a stuntman.
Right.
He was the highest paid Hollywood actor in the early 80s
Mm-hmm.
for many years. And, I mean, he was linked with this one and that one. And basically Sally Field was
There's a lot of movies he
turned.
turned down to do other films with Dom DeLuise, and they said, why? This movie was
Because I want to, and I can afford to.
No. What his excuse was, he's like, why would I make this film when I can make this movie with one of my best friends?
Yeah.
He was always about not the content of the film; it was just who was he working with. And then people started getting to see his range, because for a while you wouldn't see nothing after that whole the things he would do with Dom DeLuise and whatnot. And then he did.
Look what he did early on.
Yeah.
And that was the benchmark for him.
Sure. And then,
I mean,
crickets after that.
That movie of Deliverance, I mean, that started him up here.
Mm-hmm.
And he was going to be measured for everything from this point going forward.
But to do Smokey and the Bandit, to do...
iconic.
Yeah.
It became iconic.
Right.
I saw it when it first came out, and it was entertaining, but I thought it was silly. I thought it was stupid. You know, like Back to the Future. I had no idea that these things were going to just be blockbusters.
Huge.
And then, you know, they'll make a sequel and it does just as well and stuff like that.
You didn't like Back to the Future?
It's okay. I wouldn't call it a science fiction movie. It's more comedy.
It's more... I would agree with you on that.
Even though it had a lot of science fiction in it. Has one of my favorite actors in it.
Christopher Lloyd.
I mean, he...
You were a big Taxi fan.
Ignatowski from Taxi.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's hysterical.
All right, folks. Well, this is the end of part 1, episode 1. If you enjoyed listening thus far between my dad and myself, hash it out between genres of film. I greatly appreciate you listening. Stay tuned for part 2 of the Courtship of Ibby's Father, episode 1. And thanks for listening. Alright, folks, well, this is the end of part 1. Stay tuned for part 2 of the episode titled Alright, folks, well, this is the end of part 1 of episode 1. We're going to get into part 2, which is going to be episode 2, the Courtship of Ibby's Father, part